Rami Khouri is director of the Esam Fares Institute at the American University of Beirut. What are we looking at here, Mr. Khouri? Another day of intense battles, street battles, edging ever closer to the seat of power. What does it suggest about the battle underway?
I think there's three things that we can see happening simultaneously, which we've actually seen happening since this process started at the end of March of last year. You have the internal fighting expanding steadily throughout the country, getting more intense, and now getting closer to the center of Damascus. The second thing that's happening is you're getting the regional pressure on Syria increasing with the most recent today, the Moroccan government sent the Syrian ambassador home and the Syrians throughout the Moroccan ambassador. So there's more stress on the Syrian government from within the Arab world. And the third thing is the international arena, with the Russians and the Americans being the two poles that are pushing this process. So all three of those things today happen together, which highlights the complexity of this conflict, but also all of the trends seem to be going against the Assad regime. So it's just tightening the noose around the Assad regime.
Okay, let's work through some of those points that you raised. I mean, do you agree, first of all, that this is a civil war? This was posed by the Red Cross. And if it is, I mean, who decides whether it is or isn't?
Well, it's a technical nomenclature that they use. I served on the International Advisory Board of the International Red Cross for a few years recently, and these are very critical elements that are used to define the nature of the conflict, because it has legal implications about the kind of weapons and tactics that both sides can use, but also about the obligation to protect unarmed civilians. And therefore, it's a technical designation. The fact is that there's a major internal battle going on between many Syrians and the Syrian government. Whether it's a full-fledged civil war or just a huge uprising, that's really a technicality. But clearly there is a major military confrontation that is trying to unseat the government and is getting closer and closer to doing that.
Okay, we've heard the Russians again saying that they're not going to change their stance. They're accusing the West of blackmail. When it comes to the Russians, is money more important than lives, or do they have a point?
The Russians are a big world power. Lives, money, alliances, respect, stature, all of these things are negotiable to them, as they are to the Americans. The Russians are caught in a bind because they've taken a stand on Syria, which is not really about saving the Assad regime, but rather saving face for the Russians and generating international respect for the Russian government. So it's a position that's very difficult for them to maintain in the face of the deteriorating situation that Assad is facing and the growing international pressure on Assad. They will hold this position as long as they can. When it looks like Assad is going to go, they will shift their position. This is what superpowers do. This is how politics happens.
Sure. And is Assad being further undermined with what was happening in Morocco, which you raised the tit-for-tat over each other's ambassadors?
Only a little bit. It's just a little extra drop in this process. The international pressure on Assad has been there for a long time. The regional pressure, it started in the Arab world with the Saudi Arabians and the Qataris and other Arab governments putting direct pressure, funding the Free Syrian Army, breaking diplomatic relations. So the Moroccans throwing out the Syrian ambassador is just one more little nudge, which cumulatively it makes a difference. And it's important to see this as a cumulative series of events and political gestures, and it keeps increasing. And the cumulative nature of this, the internal fighting, the regional pressure, and the international pressure, will soon become too great for the regime to withstand. The economic base of the regime will crumble, its political support will fracture, and eventually the security support, which is so critical for it, will fray even more than it has started to fray now.
Okay, Rami Khouri, good to have your thoughts. Thank you. Director of the Esam Fares Institute.